From the misty Pacific coast to the rugged Cascade Mountains and beyond to the high desert in the east. Whether you chase black-tailed or mule deer, Roosevelts or Rockies, if you fish for bass or salmon, hunt cougars, bears, turkeys, or ducks, we want to talk about the most overlooked section of the outdoorsman community, true Pacific Northwest hunters and fishermen. You have found the podcast for you. Born in the wettest woods of the lower 48, where we only talk about the endless pursuits of the far western world to inspire you in your next adventure.
There will be many tags in our lives that go unfilled, but if your first objective is to learn and grow, you can find success in every season.
And I stand up and like, oh my God,
Your foot fell off.
it's off. Can't find it.
And ask the big questions about what truly motivates our life in the wild.
I believe that God gave us the ability to do this.
You go from plodding along and not really living to living the full, abundant life that He has for you now.
You are listening to the Oregon First Hunting and Fishing Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in. I'm here in Tigard, Oregon with Vaughn Hanchett of Vaughn Adventures, and I'm your host, Bryant. Vaughn, thanks for letting me into your house.
Yeah, thanks for coming, man.
We never even met at all before, just kind of barely texted, and so here we are sitting in your bedroom recording a podcast.
You seem like a cool enough guy, man. I looked at your Instagram. You do all the same stuff I like doing.
Sure, yeah, we can trust each other in that. Well, remember to follow us wherever you'd like to stay up to date, especially if you'd like to join us for hunting trips or fishing trips. Facebook users, join our group at Salem First Hunting and Fishing Club, and there you can be a part of the conversation of what we're doing. We just had a rifle sighting day, had a bunch of guys out for that. That was super fun. Got a lot of people shooting straight. A lot of people who either had new guns or new scopes on old guns, kind of a deal. And so it was a bit of work, but we got most people squared away. And
Nice.
so that was good. Our next event is in December. We're going to do a duck hunt after the late deer archery season in December.
Nice.
And so join our Facebook group if you want to learn more, or just follow us around on social media, and you can stay up to date on what's going on there. In this episode, we talk about fishing and bow hunting. And in the news, all of Oregon's neighboring states now test positive for CWD. More on that later. And finally, we have a conversation with our guest, Vaughn Adventures. So Vaughn, you have been fishing for a long time. You said you grew up here in the upper part of the Willamette Valley. Looking at your videos, you make some really awesome, high-quality videos, lots of fishing ones, and then more recently getting into the hunting side of things. And I'm sitting here in your room next to these two beautiful 6x6 or 5x5 and a 6x6 awesome elk. Really impressive, man.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm way too fortunate, man. It's probably more luck than skill.
Yeah, you think so? I mean, well, there's something to it to be able to do it twice, right?
Yeah.
Does lightning strike twice, and is that what the saying is? Something like that?
Hopefully it strikes 3 times, man. I'd
There
be
you
happy
go.
to get one this September.
Well, and you and your roommates eat through that elk fast enough, or what?
Oh, yeah, we do pretty good.
Yeah.
I try to give it to the neighbors and stuff, too.
Oh, sweet.
Do
Do your roommates hunt with you?
No, actually, I'm
Okay.
the only hunter in the household.
Great. You're the provider.
Yeah,
That's good. All right. Well, now it's time for
Icebreakers.
fishing or hunting.
Hunting.
Bow or rifle.
Bow.
Fly fishing or conventional.
Conventional fishing all the way.
All right. East side or west side for hunting?
West side.
West side?
Yeah.
Yep.
I like beating my head against a wall.
You like swimming around in a salad bowl?
Yeah, I like the greenery. It's pretty.
Cool. Finally, deer or elk?
Elk.
Elk. Yep.
Yeah, I don't even have to think twice about it.
Yep. All right. I'm going to interject here and give you guys a look at our local news story. We always try to cover something that's going on in our state of Oregon that has to do with the outdoors, whether it's legislation, management, or poaching, or some sort of big thing that's going on. So this month, we are looking at CWD. Now, this is kind of fresh news, but for the first time, CWD, chronic wasting disease, was detected in Washington. So that means that Oregon is the last West Coast state to not have any positive tested deer. They found CWD in Washington on August 1st this summer, 2024, and it was a white-tailed doe. She was found, she was skinny, she was dead, just north of Spokane. And when they tested her, sure enough, they found the first tested and confirmed case of CWD in Washington. California also found it just this year, back in May, in the spring. California found 2 different mule deer with CWD. One was killed from a car crash, and the other was just dead from sickness. They found it dead. And Idaho has long had known cases of CWD, but they just confirmed that first case in North Idaho, which means Oregon is now completely surrounded. We're the last West Coast state to not have a positive tested deer. For those who do not know what chronic wasting disease is, it's something called a prion disease, which means that it affects the brain and the spinal cord. Mutated proteins reproduce themselves, and they replace the good proteins, and these mutated proteins, or prions, they do not work properly, and so it causes slow and eventual brain dysfunction, and it is incurable. There is no treatment for it. So what happens is these prions, they spread extremely easy through direct or indirect contact from animal to animal. There's no risk to humans yet, but it is a similar kind of disease to mad cow disease, which is why people are concerned about this one for the jumping from deer to humans, let alone just the concern that our deer populations could be hit with even another reason why they're all dying. Oregon has been checking for CWD for several years. Hunters are encouraged to check their deer and elk with the biologists. They set up special checkpoints, mostly in eastern Oregon, during the rifle elk season. Otherwise, you can contact a field office to get it tested. And then if you go to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife website, there's a long list of taxidermists who partner with them to collect samples as well and to do testing on those animals. So if you're bringing your animal to a taxidermist, there's a really good long list of people there that work with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to test those. So I guess if we're going to look on the bright side of things about our low deer numbers in eastern Oregon, that's going to slow the spread down of CWD, because areas where there's high deer populations, like the whitetail states, they have seen it just spread rapidly like wildfire. It has slowed down in places with lower deer density, which a lot of eastern Oregon fits into that category. People are worried that elk may be more susceptible to the spread because they are herd animals, and they're always clumped up and grouped together, so it seems as though as soon as one elk in a herd gets it, it's just going to be the whole herd very quickly will have CWD. Eventually, though, it is extremely likely and expected that we will get CWD in Oregon. The question is more of when, and then what happens after that. I mean, there's certain barriers like the Cascade Mountains or different natural geographical regions where different deer herds might not interact with each other that will continue to slow the spread before the entire state would be infected with chronic wasting disease. But in certain states that have a lot of it, many hunters have chosen to not even eat the deer if it's tested positive, which, man, I don't even know. It's never jumped the species barrier. It'd be really hard to make that decision for myself. As much as I'd like to say hopefully I never have to, I probably will have to at some point in my life as a hunter decide whether or not to eat a deer that has chronic wasting disease. But let's keep an eye on that. So now we have Idaho, California, and Washington all infected with CWD. We are the last holdout. So make sure to get those animals tested. It's free, and it really helps us keep an eye on the situation there. Back to the show. Have you done much deer hunting?
I have. I've done a little bit. I try every year. I've had some really close calls, but it's something I still haven't been able to connect with.
Yeah.
This year, I'm definitely putting a lot of effort to hopefully try to get one.
And that's all archery, right?
Yeah. Everything I do is archery.
Yeah. You know, man, something about the September archery deer season is just so intimidating. I don't know if it's different like on the east side, but out here on the west side, you know, it takes a special amount of gur to find those deer. in the hot weather.
You know, can't understate it because there's so many different methods, and everyone says that they have the right way of doing it, but really I don't think there's any right way of doing it. You go out there and you kind of just got to figure out what works for you. And so far I haven't really figured out what works for me.
Sure.
I've gotten pretty close though.
Yeah.
Last year I got pretty close. I got 60 yards from a nice 3x3 with Tigards. It was
cool.
Would have been a really solid first blacktail.
Yeah.
But unfortunately I treated it more like an elk hunt than I did a deer hunt, you know.
Got it.
Thinking in my head I can make more noise than
Sure.
probably should.
That's the one thing, yeah, because I am an established deer hunter, but not so much elk, you know. Like, I love elk hunting, definitely putting a lot of effort into elk hunting this year compared to blacktail, but I'm a blacktail guy through and through. And so switching from the blacktail style hunting to elk is just a completely different ball game.
Two different worlds.
Yeah, you're moving around all the time. You're breaking sticks on purpose and making, you know, screaming through the woods and squealing.
Yeah,
and
you make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of moving around too.
And that's the fun part about elk hunting is they're kind of there or they're not. With blacktail, they're such good at hiding that they could be anywhere. You know, you could spend all day long in the same patch of woods, and then at the very end of the day, you see a buck that was there the whole time. But with elk, it's a lot more obvious when they're around.
Man, were you on my hunts with me? How'd you know? That's what I encountered every single time. I'd be in the woods for a long, long time, and I'd come across one at the end of my day coming out, you know?
Yeah.
But even little things like that I've been using to educate me on where I can find them and how to get in on them, you know? I'm still a novice at this. I have a lot to learn.
Sure. Well, hopefully you'll always have a lot to learn, right? I mean, that's kind of the attitude that keeps you successful and keeps you going, is always being humble and ready to learn more. And being humbled by the woods is part of the experience of hunting. So yeah.
I think it's kind of one of the more fun aspects of it too. You know, how many things are there in the world that you will never the best at?
Yeah.
There's always opportunity for you to be better, and I think that's something pretty special about hunting and fishing.
Yep.
There's always something to learn.
The animals are always learning too. Yeah. So even on a grand scale, like this is a big part of the conversation just globally of elk hunting. People want to talk about how they're starting to get call shy. It's like, well,
we could talk about that.
Our dealings with elk have to evolve with that, you know?
Yeah. 100%.
Speaking of that, elk season, by the time this is released, it's going to be the middle of elk season. So people are going to be eating it up, ready to hear and talk about elk. Man, I'm getting pretty excited. I've been shooting my bow a ton, feeling pretty strong in that regard, so I'm happy about that. How about you? You been able to get out on the range?
Yeah, I try to get out at very least every week. I try to get out and shoot, you know, shooting different distances, elevation, side hill. I try to do, you know, put yourself in as many real life situations as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been getting out, checking trail cameras, scouting, shooting my bow, all of it. I'm ready to go.
Nice. What does scouting look like for you?
It's an all year thing. Nice. I know people who go in and they'll start in June, July, and then go through till August and then back out until September. I know people who don't do much scouting at all, and that's kind of how I first started. Actually, is I didn't really do much on the ground scouting. My mentality was thinking if I spend a lot of time in the woods, they're going to smell me, and I don't want to spook off anything that may be there. So I actually spent a lot of time on, you know, Google Earth, looking at you know, maps, Onyx maps, stuff like that. But the last 2 years I've gone in and I've spent more on the ground hunting throughout the entire year, and basically it's just looking at new spots. That's mainly what it is. You know, it's not a lot of going into the same old spots and trying to find something new. I'm trying to go out there and, you know, put my eyes and feet on new ground that I haven't been into before, and that's where I've been finding a lot of success.
Awesome.
They're big animals. They travel far, you know. You got to cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say on scouting, because for me, I don't spend all year looking for animals, partially because season by season they are so different from the next, you know, and so that was one of the mistakes I made early on, is finding deer in the middle of winter or even in spring and thinking, okay, I found all the deer, but they're not there in November. They're on the next, you know, mountain over or whatever it might be. Same general area, but they just use the habitat so different depending on the time of year.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's, you know, you can kind of learn a bit from that, though. You can look at what sort of terrain features they're using at different times of the year, and that can really educate you to like where their home is.
Yeah. Yeah. With elk scouting, that that makes a ton of sense too, because you can find like, okay, there's a meadow here, there's a marsh here, there's a saddle here, there's a peak here, and just kind of move around in the habitat area compared to like, you do the same thing with a deer, obviously, but the deer just are so different in how they use the habitat and a lot more specific in where they're going to hang out compared to elk. They could be on this side of the mountain today, and then tomorrow they're on the next, or wherever they might be.
They can be anywhere. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a misconception a lot of people get, specifically with coastal Roosevelt elk. People are always trying to look on, they're probably going to be feeding in southerly slopes, bedding in northerly slopes. It's not always the case.
Yeah.
There's a lot of land out here with a lot of good food and a lot of good water and a lot of good bed zones. They don't necessarily need a north-facing slope to bed on. They could find a cold patch of timber in a bottom to bed. They don't necessarily need to feed on a south-facing slope. There's feed everywhere.
Yeah.
So you really have to kind of adapt to that sort of environment, knowing that they could be literally anywhere. So I don't focus so much on finding those need zones. I try to find the elk, and then I let the elk educate me on where they like to be. Because I'll be frank with you, a lot of places that I find elk in, I would have never guessed that there would have been elk there, because I thought that there wasn't any of the things that they needed, the resources.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of interesting too how much when you research Western elk hunting, right? Most of it's about east of the Cascades over to the Rocky Mountains, and that's the West for most of the United States. They call that the West,
Right.
and so there's a lot more than there used to be. But there for a while there was hardly any content about the actual coastal hunting, especially between Washington and Oregon, and our Roosevelt elk, like you're saying. I mean, water's not really that huge of a limiting factor in at least most of the areas I hunt. I know some southern Oregon and whatnot, it's a lot drier down there, even on the coastal side. But up here, like with blacktail, where people are saying, "Oh, look for water," like that's not a problem. they just can lick the brush when they're walking by, and they'll get all the water they need.
Not just that, also all the roughage and brush they're eating has plenty of water in it too.
Yeah.
And you got to think, well, if there's feed everywhere and all the feed they're eating has a ton of water in it, why would they need a watering hole?
Well, and that's true. That's not just a theory. Like I used to have goats, and when in the springtime, when the grass was all luscious and covered in dew, they hardly ever drank from the trough. But then it wasn't until summertime, when there wasn't really much water and stuff, that they would drink a ton of water all the time, just because they get so much of it from what they eat. And same with deer.
Exactly. And it's little things like that I've learned. It kind of helps me in the woods, because instead of spending all this time sitting on Onyx maps marking water sources and stuff, instead, if I'm focusing on water sources, it's mainly looking for wallows, if anything. Now I don't even focus on water. There's so much up here in the coastal range. And like you said, most people will think that elk hunting in the West, they think of Rocky Mountain elk hunting,
Yeah.
In Roosevelt, they're very different. It's the same animal, but it's their behavior is totally different. Where they live is totally different, and I honestly feel like they have a lot more resources over here, so it's a lot harder to pin them down.
Yeah. When they do population studies and the biologists try to decide what the biggest threat is on the east side of the state, where it's a lot of the Rocky Mountain elk on private land, alfalfa fields and whatnot, their biggest problem is lack of nutrients, because the fields they're eating in, even though it's a lot of food, a lot of roughage, it's supposedly not the right amount of nutrients and diverse diet that they need for raising the calves. While out here on the west side, it's really predation. That's one of the bottlenecks, especially for calves. We have so many cougars and black bears, and they have a lot of them, especially in the northeast and the mountainous areas in Oregon as well. But out here on the west side of the state, it's not really nutrients so much that's a big problem, because we have so much for them to eat. It's the predators that really hits them hard.
Yeah, no, you're completely correct about that. And it also adds to the hunting pressure. They're not just being hunted by humans. Over here on the west, they have to really focus on staying away from those cats, those bears, stuff like that. I can't tell you the number of times I come across bear scat and it's just full of elk hair.
Yep.
It's probably the biggest problem we have out here. And A lot of people make assumptions, and I have the same assumption that, the biologist numbers on cats are probably slightly low. They're probably pretty accurate, but they're probably
Sure.
slightly low. I get a lot of pictures of big cats on my cameras.
Oh yeah,
A lot of them.
Yeah, usually I get at least one cat per camera set, and maybe not more than 1 or 2 pictures of it because they have such big loops that they make. But from walking around, you can't walk a day without finding a whole bunch of cat sign on those roads.
Not to mention bear sign.
Yeah, not even thinking of bear sign. You can't escape bear sign.
It's everywhere.
But it's so brushy that you hardly ever see the bears, unless you're looking at clear cuts or something like that. Most of the time I see a bear, it's just a black butt running away from me.
Yeah.
In the thickest brush that you can imagine.
Love blackberries, man.
Well, yep. When you say something's a real berry area, right? It's kind of a play on words.
Yeah.
It's berry because of the berries.
Right. And people may be kind of confused because they see some of the Roosevelt elk that we take over here on the Coast Range, and they're probably thinking, well, if your bulls are eating so good, why such small antlers? I think something really to keep in mind is that Roosevelt elk I don't know exactly why they evolved this way, but their antlers are smaller than a lot of Rocky Mountain elk. And typically what you're going to see or what you hear is, if a bull's eating good, he's got good nutrition, he'll have big horns on his head. And so it can be kind of confusing to see a 200-inch 5-point elk and say, wow, that thing's healthy.
Yeah.
But it's true. It's just true. The animals over here have a ton of food, a lot of nutrition, a lot of stuff to work with. The only thing that's working against them is predators.
Just compare the body size, and there you go.
That's where it shows, man.
Yep.
You get 300 pounds of elk meat, it's a healthy bull.
And that's all that I know. When I someday, at one point in my life, draw a Rocky Mountain elk tag, I'm probably going to be slightly disappointed by the body size. From what everyone says, it seems like people always talk about a stark difference in body size there,
Yeah, I look at a lot of pictures and I think, wow, the antler mass is incredible, but the body, it's probably about 2/3 the size of a Roosevelt.
Man, that's just hard to imagine. All that I know is Rosies. That's all that I know, and I don't even have that much experience with them. I've just been hunting for a handful of years with my buddy who he's an archery elk hunter. I never could figure out the rifle game on the elk, dude. The West Side elk, it's rough.
Tough.
The people who got it, which is only, what's that tag, like 2% or something like that?
Yeah.
And the people, those 2% are the ones who get them every year.
Yeah.
And then all the other slobs like me driving out there looking for elk in the circus of trucks,
Well, and it's rough too. They only get 4 days, whether they pick first or second season, you only get 4 days if you got a special tag for a special unit,
Yep.
And 4 days to make good on a tag, I mean, that's hard for any hunt.
Yeah.
That's going to be hard for any species.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought about doing rifle at first, but that was kind of one of the main attractors to archery hunting to me is the fact that I have time.
Yeah.
And really, I think that's going to be the ultimate killer of most of these animals is time. You can be a great caller, you can be a great shot with your bow, but if you don't spend time in the woods, you're just not going to kill them.
Yep. I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to. And I can't really say if there's a lot more, but you hear about a lot more wounding with archery, and especially these days where there's so many new archery hunters. I mean, I'm one of them, there's just so many new archery hunters. And I had this conversation with Trent Fisher a couple episodes back, and so we don't need to rehash the whole thing, but I think all of us are kind of holding our breath like, okay, what's going to happen? What's going to happen when there's more archery hunters than rifle hunters,
I think it's been an issue. I think it's going to be an issue. I think it will always be an issue. And I don't think it's just for bows either. Rifle hunters wound a lot of animals as well.
Yeah.
You see a lot of bad shots come out of the rifle world, but also coming out of the archery world. I mean, this 5-point you have sitting next to you, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's got a broadhead in its eye socket.
Yeah, I saw your video when you were cutting that out of the back of it. So its eye was intact. It just had the arrow like behind the eye?
So the eyeball was split on the bottom. It must have gone just to the bottom of the eye socket and sunk its way in. He was blind in that eye. If you go back and watch
blind.
if you look at the video, the iris and everything, his pupils all grayed out. And I didn't realize that until we got him out of there, and I really got to like look at him real close, and I realized he was blind in that eye.
Yeah.
And originally I thought he had got poked in the eye by an antler tine or something like that, but
Sure.
once we started cutting on it and we saw the broadhead, my stomach dropped. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you're talking about, a lot of people have large concerns about archery hunters and the shots they make, and the fact that we're gonna have a lot of new archery hunters coming into the world. You know, I'm one of them. Let's just be honest. I'm one of them. I've only been hunting for, I think this is my 4th year, and I've been archery hunting for 3 years now. And it's something I think about every day leading up to the hunt. Is my bow dialed in? Are my broadheads sharp enough? Is my shot good enough? Am I going to be able to take a confident shot? You know? And I think we owe it to the animal to be able to have that confidence going into the field. And I think it takes a lot of visualization and practice. It is going to be a problem, though. I hope to God out there that most people out there are putting into work to make sure that they do right by the animal, but it's not always going to be the case.
And for me, like, even sure, like the wounding aside, just the sheer numbers of people, at some point, you know, there's only so many animals I can sell tags for, and so it's even though it's only a 10% tag or whatever here on the west side, so hopefully it can sustain the amount of the volume of hunters we have. But there is something to archery hunting. You know, you have to physically be able to shoot a bow. You have to have the time to practice it and the place to practice it. You know, you could get away with shooting your rifle once or twice a year.
Right.
I sure did, and it was never a problem for me.
Right.
You know, all these blacktail I've killed with my rifle and sighted in. I'm not really a huge gun guy. I wouldn't like go shooting or anything. I also never took 500-yard shots.
Right.
You know, the longest shot I ever took was 250, and it was just a nice double long drop.
Still a great shot.
And yeah, but that's what I'm saying is even 250 is kind of long for the west side. People shooting clear cuts, I get it. Yeah, that's not too long for the west side, but it's just the limitation I put on myself as someone who would sight in my rifle, and then that's all the shooting I did all year. I'd throw some at 300 to make sure I knew what I was doing, and that was it. With archery hunting, that's not an option. You have to really cut out the time, especially if you live in city limits. You can't practice at home. And so you are stuck, you know, driving somewhere or going to a range, or it's a big commitment. And so that might help self-level the volume of archery hunters out there, is the amount of people who get into it and then realize after a year or two, like, this is just so much more work, so much more investment. And then maybe they'll default back to rifle or whatever we see happen there.
No, I think you're probably right on that front. Most people, I mean, when I got into archery, I already knew I had taken a liking to archery, and I thought that bows were cool my whole life. And when I bought my bow, I had no intention of hunting. Believe it or not, I just bought a bow because I thought it would be a cool discipline to learn. I thought it would be something to challenge myself with. But once I realized I could actually shoot my bow decently, and I was willing to put the time in to make the discipline worthwhile, that's when I started thinking about hunting legitimately. And like you said, I don't know how many people have that sort of mindset. I'm sure a lot of people buy a bow because it looks cool.
Yeah.
And they start shooting it. And, you know, I've worked at a bow retailer before, and I've helped plenty of these people. I've sold bows to guys who bought them for bachelor parties, you know, because they
really?
I sold a bow one time to a guy. He bought a bow he wanted to take to a bachelor party so him and all of his bros could shoot it. And
nice.
had a real hard time explaining to him about draw lengths, and it's not going to work for everyone, but you know, it's going to be one of those things that deters a lot of people once you get into it and you realize how much arrows cost. You have to do research on broadheads, find out what broadhead's going to be effective. You have to take the time to shoot the broadheads, make sure they
sharpen them or get new ones, and then you shoot out your arrows, and then you always are working on the bow. You know, like you're saying, it's just so much more than a rifle. which if you treat it right, you zero it in, you stick with your same ammo, you know what you're shooting, you can get a rifle fairly affordably and then just shoot it every year for 50 years. You know,
right? Whereas with
different.
a bow, your form goes into it, how you hold it.
Yeah.
You know, what your grip hand's doing, what your anchor hand's doing, where you're anchoring on your face. All of these things, if they're not exact every time, you're gonna have slip ups. You're gonna have sins. I don't know if you knew this, but actually, where the word sin comes from is archery.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Sin means you missed the mark.
Ah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
And so you really have to cut out all of the errors as best you can, especially if you're planning to elk hunt.
Yeah.
And I went into elk hunting thinking I could just buy a bow and shoot, and I thought I was a decent shot. But when I got out there and spent time among them in the terrain, watching them move, you realize you have to be on top of it.
And it's intimidating when they're coming in. It's a moving target.
Oh yeah, especially when they're screaming.
Yeah,
because then you're jackhammering, shaking, and you're trying to calm yourself down. There's a lot that goes into it, and a lot of it's mental too.
Yeah. For me, because I have had the years of I don't know what to call it, experience with killing animals.
Yeah.
You know, hunting deer with a rifle, harvesting. Yeah, I was able to go more into a natural. It felt more natural when I first saw the elk instead of panicking, and like going into buck fever mode, and it was more of like robotic, like, okay, don't freak out, you know?
Yeah. You can kind of disassociate yourself in that aspect. You kind of take your conscious out of it and just do what you know you need to do. And a lot of people have a hard time with that. I've never really struggled with buck fever. I think is what people call it.
Yep.
My first elk, I was pretty dead set on killing that thing when it walked in front of me, and my arrow landed right where I was aiming. But the only reason I think I'm able to be so calm in that moment is because I had so many screw ups. I called so many elk in close. I got all the jackhammering out the way. I sat there staring at a big bull elk, knowing I didn't have a shot. And when you get to sit there with the animal for some time, you lose some of that nervousness. Which I think is something a lot of people don't understand, and what a lot of people are lacking from not going out and scouting too. If you spend time around the animals, you can lose a lot of that nervousness and put yourself into that mental zone to actually harvest that animal.
Mm-hmm. And one thing for me too, like, I love tracking them. That's how I've killed most of my deer, is tracking them. And it's so easy to track elk in the right conditions because, you know,
dude, they just blow a hole through the woods, man.
Like you'll never catch up to them by chasing them, but if you're careful, you know, they like to lay down and they'll meander around, they'll hang out in the same feeding area, you know, and it's pretty easy to track elk in that regard.
They leave a highway. Yeah, you could just walk on it. They damn near leave a cat road for you.
Yeah, exactly. And so, there's been so many times where the way I get into spots is on the elk trails that are the elk highways that every animal in the woods uses, that the elk have cut down to the mud. And, but anyway, you know, walking on those, you start to smell them. You just kind of are like, okay, you're not as surprised. With blacktail, a lot of the times I would see a blacktail, I would be surprised because it's like they could be anywhere at all. Yeah. They could be 10 feet away from you behind a bush. You know, they're just so quiet and sneaky, and they just are laying down, you know. But the elk, it's not as often that they sneak up on you.
No, and even when they do come in quiet, you can hear them breaking branches and, you know, moving the leaves around and stuff. They're big animals. But I can definitely agree with you on that point about the blacktail. I have several experiences where I was actually elk hunting, and I have a deer tag in my pocket, but I'm not even thinking about deer. I'm focused on elk. And they just surprised me out of nowhere. I remember the first time I would have had an opportunity to shoot a deer. I was moving up towards this clear cut. And for some reason, I didn't think to glass in front of me, the little open areas, to make sure there wasn't something there.
Yeah.
And I come walking up, and I hear a deer blow about 30 yards to my right, and I look, and dude, I cannot lie to you, there was about 4 bucks sitting right there, two spikes, and then like a 3-point,
like a
and a
bachelor
forky
group.
little bachelor group hanging out on this hillside,
man.
30 yards to my right, and before I could even lift
that tag.
before I even lifted that bow, they were gone.
Yep.
I had no idea they were there.
Oh man,
Yeah, they're
that's
sneaky.
the worst. They seriously, or like how many times do they bust and then make you jump out of your skin when it's dark and all that you're thinking about is cougars or something.
Yeah.
But if we're gonna talk about mini heart attacks, the grouse definitely take the cake as far as all of a sudden.
I call them missile chickens.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah,
Man,
Just
those things move quick.
suddenly take off right next to you, and they always wait till they're right next to you, and they make the loudest noise. That they get me every time. Wake me up.
Yeah, I hate those birds. They scare me.
Then the other little inconvenience of walking in the woods on the elk trails is the face full of spiders.
Oh my gosh, face full of spiders. The worst I encounter every September here on the coast, those yellow jackets.
Oh really?
Yeah, you can't get away from the yellow jackets, man.
Yeah.
Especially when they have their ground nests, and they'll make them right in the middle of an elk trail too. So anytime I see a hole in the ground, I'm real cautious.
Yep.
Yeah. Fortunately, I walk around with gaiters on, so anytime I have,
helps.
there's been a time or two where I've stepped on a nest, and the gaiters definitely saved me. But tell you what, I've never ran so fast through through a thicket of Douglas fir in my life.
Yep. Yeah, and the other thing, it's really only a problem in spring, but a little bit in the fall is ticks. I don't know if you've gotten many ticks on you.
No,
but
I haven't actually.
I've gotten quite a few tick bites when I'm like walking up creeks and stuff like that. Like I said, mostly in the spring when it's first warming up, but a bit in the fall too.
There's those I forget what they're called. I think they're deer ticks. They're flying ticks. I get some.
Yeah.
I get
those
some
guys.
in September. There's been a time or two where I'll feel one land on my neck and I'll pluck them off real quick. But I don't think I've ever been bitten by a tick. Yeah, I hear it's a lot more of a problem out east in southern Oregon.
Yeah. Well, and we don't have like Lyme disease or anything like
Oh,
that.
thank God.
But the those flying little things, I noticed a few years ago. I was archery hunting with my buddy. I wasn't archery hunting. I was just there, helping learning to call and whatnot. And
Emotional support.
Yeah. We noticed that every time we'd get close to this herd of elk, the bugs were just thick, and we'd be covered in flies and those little, flying tick-looking, whatever the heck they are.
Oh yeah.
And so that's how we knew we were in the elk, is because every time the bugs would get bad that season, the elk are nearby, and sure enough, we'd have elk encounters after that.
Funny you actually say that. I actually use that as a trick when it comes to wallows. A lot of times if I come up on a wallow that's been disturbed and I find a lot of flying insects around that area, it tells me it's been used recently, because they're still liking whatever was left in that wallow from that animal.
Yeah.
And usually I can expect them to come back.
Yeah.
Because if there's insects still in that area, they have no reason to leave, because
And the elk are there.
Yeah, exactly. The elk are there. It's just something to think about.
Yeah, the first ever elk experience I had by myself as a tag holder with a bow, going by myself on a solo hunt, was actually I called a bull. I was on this logging road, and he was down below, maybe even 200 yards down below was this wallow, and he came out of the wallow to me in the thickest reprod and blackberries with no way to see in at all. I just heard brush breaking. And so then I'm, okay, this is what I've trained for.
Right, yeah.
But anyway, I blew that. But he must have been a smaller bull, like not very wise, because I ended up like looping around. Even though he winded me, I looped down and around the hill and up into, and I found the wallow. And there was a big old shed in the wallow, which was weird because they don't normally use wallows when they're shedding. I thought that was kind of cool. So they just kind of live in that area year round, I guess. But anyway, I could follow the mud from where he left the wallow, and it was just very clear mud trail all the way up to the road where I was. And then he came back down, and so about 30 minutes after that, I do more calls, and he came back in that thick stuff. Then he bumped again, and then came back in again. So he really wanted me to be a cow.
Yeah.
I never bugled. I was just cow calling. And, after that third bump, he finally, I never found him again after that, but it was pretty crazy experience.
Yeah, you never know what's going through an elk's head, man. He could have been desperate. He may have got bullied by all the other bulls in his
he was
area.
in a wallow. Who knows, rubbing trees and getting all muddy and peeing on himself. Like, he was probably down there having himself a little one-man rut show, and then here's a cow up on the road.
Right.
Really wanted it to be a cow.
right. And you said that he had winded you, but you were able to get back in there. I think that's something that I don't want to gloss over that, because I feel like a lot of people will treat a hunt as if, like, if they get winded, they think the game's over. But you can always go back to that zone. You can come in from another way. You can head the elk off.
Well, like I said, it was about 30 minutes before I saw him again after that. But he didn't leave the country.
Exactly.
So, to your point.
Exactly. Yeah. And something to think about too, depending on the sort of area you're hunting, I'm not necessarily hunting super far into the backcountry. I'm not driving up a logging road like 60 miles up into the hills. A lot of areas I hunt are actually pretty close to agriculture and stuff like that, and something I think about pretty often is these animals are smelling humans every day. Every day. So yes, they are intimidated by us. They know they're being hunted, but it doesn't always mean that if they smell you, they're going to run 2 counties over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and so, which is what I experienced there. But the cows seem to care less. They're not as invested in staying in the same area when they smell a person.
No, they're a lot more skeptical.
Yeah.
A lot more skeptical.
Yep, which is why they live longer than the bulls.
Yeah.
By a lot.
Women always live longer.
Yep. So we're going out of order of our normal show today, but that's great. I wanted to ask you, how long have you been hunting and fishing for? You already kind of said hunting for a few years, but how long have you been fishing?
So I've been fishing since I was a kid, but when we were growing up, it was mainly just rainbow trout, power bait, nothing special.
I love taking my boy. I have a 3.5-year-old. Yep, that's the game.
I still do it.
Yep.
I still do it.
Yeah, hey, me too, man. I'm not going to lie.
It's fun. But I really started hitting it hard when I turned 16. I started getting into salmon and steelhead fishing. I had a friend who was pretty gung-ho. He wanted to grow up to be a guide one day,
Oh, sweet.
Not the typical dream of most kids, but, we grew up in a small town, so he took me out, and we would go salmon fishing. I'd pick up a thing here and there, and eventually, after catching a few of them, you start taking it pretty seriously.
Nice.
So now I've been fishing for over a decade now, and it's a pretty big part of my life. I fish for most everything in most fishing seasons.
Yeah.
Hunting is more of a recent endeavor. I've been hunting for about 4 years, 3 years of it being specifically buying archery tags. And I can honestly say that a lot of it came out of fishing, just being in that world and wanting to harvest fresh meat, being in nature and being in this wild environment, and living off the land for myself and gathering my own resources to some extent.
Yep. Yeah, that for me too, that was always the huge draw, because I didn't grow up in a hunting family, and so I didn't have any exposure to that when I was younger. And so there was just this strong desire to be self-sufficient and live off the land. That's always been a really strong part of who I am. And I was fortunate that when I was 8 years old, my family moved to a couple acres, and I was able to have chickens and pigs and cows and a big garden, and really fish a ton as well. We were pretty close to the Yamhill River.
Nice.
And
good area.
Yeah, I'd fish my brains out all the time.
Oh yeah.
Growing up. But then something about hunting was so alluring, and I was always really jealous of my friends that had parents that hunted that took them. And so, yeah, like you're saying, as soon as I was old enough to take myself, I was like, I'm doing it. And there you are.
Yeah. And I'm pretty late to the game. I'm going to be 30 this December. But
nice.
Even when I was a kid.
What day?
December 12th.
Oh, okay. All right. Sweet.
Yeah.
I'm born on the 23rd, so that's why I asked.
Oh, nice. Nice. Even when I was a kid, like my mom would always sign up for all these different freebie magazines and stuff, and I think she got a trial for like Field and Stream or something like that, or maybe it was a Cabela's catalog. And I remember being like super little and just flipping through all the camouflage and the bows and stuff. And I didn't have any like interest in doing it, but I always thought it was just the coolest stuff ever.
You just look at a bow; it's one of the coolest things. Like,
oh man, it looks like an alien spaceship these days.
Yeah. For me, my family had cable. Remember the cable days?
Yeah.
And you flip over to like the 500s, and there's the Pursuit channel, and you watch all the whitetail guys shooting these giant whitetail bucks with bows on cornfields and ranches and stuff.
Right.
And I didn't know any better. I just, that's hunting, cool, and I'd always want to watch that.
For me, it wasn't until I actually started listening to a lot of different podcasts and listening to people just talk about it,
Oh, yeah.
And people talking about hunting, it just had such a romance to it that I didn't realize.
Yeah.
And it was more about being connected to the land that we live on,
Yes, yeah.
Regardless, all of us live on planet Earth and are a part of this ecosystem. And the thought of being able to inject myself into the food chain and, maybe get a glimpse of what it was like to be an early human, it just, it was really interesting to me. And so I went out and tried it a couple times, and man, it's an addiction.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, man, I don't think they make drugs this powerful.
Yeah, and a big part of that too is you realize that you don't just inject yourself into the food chain as like a new agent that wasn't there before. Like, you're a part of the food chain even before that. It's just there's all these layers and steps between you and where your food comes from. And like you're saying, for me, that was a huge part of wanting to be a hunter. Is I know exactly where my food came from.
Right. It's much more direct. You're taking the middleman out of it. And I don't know. To some extent, it kind of feels gross. I don't know what happened to these animals. I don't know where they came from. I don't like the idea that a lot of them are raised in these mass grave environments where, it's just a slaughterhouse of hundreds, if not thousands, of head of cattle and stuff like that. I don't think it's any way. I feel like people get the wrong impression from a lot of hunters that we hate animals or something, but I really love animals.
Yeah.
I don't want there to be thousands of cows living in a pen, I'd rather them be able to, roam, do what they naturally do. And so I made a decision for myself, take myself out of that environment, you know? And honestly, I'm really, really happy and grateful and fortunate to live this sort of lifestyle now.
Yep. And that's sort of the thing there too, is like, it's the reality of needing to feed a nation of however many millions of people there
100%.
are. It's a factory farming situation.
Yeah. There's not much we can do to stop it. People need to eat regardless. And, I understand not everyone's going to have the ability to get out there and hunt, know, and
there's not enough animals for that. If everyone had to live off the animals, they'd go extinct.
We don't need market hunting. We don't need that. Yeah.
But there are better ways to get meat that is not only higher quality and it tastes better and all that different stuff, but something about it feels ethically better. The quality of life of that animal is better.
Knowing that the meat I'm eating came from an animal that got to live its whole life in its natural home, its natural environment, with its natural ecosystem of animals around it, makes me feel a whole lot better.
Yeah.
And not to mention the fact that these animals, if we don't harvest them, their deaths typically, they're not laid up in a hospital bed with their family around them.
They're usually eaten alive from the butt first.
Yeah, eaten alive from the butt first, or it's disease, or one of the main ones is starvation,
Yeah, they get too old, they lose their teeth
they
or whatever.
Grind their teeth down to nothing, they can't eat anything anymore, you know?
And that's on the predator side and the prey side.
Mm-hmm.
You see like someone will get like an old cougar or something, and it just has like flat teeth.
Yeah.
And you can't imagine how hard it is to kill something with flat teeth. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we're people and we don't use our teeth. Our teeth are kind of flat, so
our teeth are they're relatively flat for sure.
Yeah. Sweet. So, what bow do you shoot?
Right now I'm shooting it's a 2021 Bowtech Solution SD. I think the SD stands for short draw. Maxes out at 28.5 inches for draw length, which just so happens to be my draw length.
Ooh, nice. You got the half in there.
Yeah,
That's specific.
yeah. I like it. It gets me all the horsepower out of the bow that I can manage, you know.
Yeah.
I've shot a few different bows over the years. My first bow was an Elite, and I still really do like Elite bows. I moved on to PSE for a little while, tried those out, and then
Heard a lot of good things about PSE.
I feel like PSE is wonderful. I loved my PSE bow. It was one of those things growing up in Oregon, you know, especially once I got into hunting. I felt like every time I walked into the woods with anything other than a bow tech, I was almost shunned. You know, a lot of people would be like, "Oh, what kind of bow you shoot?" And I'm like, "Oh, I have a PSE."
Yeah,
like, you don't shoot a bow tech. And they look at me like there's like I got a tail growing out of my head or something like that.
I think that things have changed, but just from my awareness of the bow culture, you're exactly right.
Right. But well, and so because of that, for a long time, I avoided them. I'll just be honest. You know,
really?
I kind of had this attitude where I was like, I don't need a bow tech.
Everyone's
shooting a bow tech. I don't need that.
Yeah.
Well, one day I went into an archery shop and there was a bow tech sitting there on a discount rack, and someone had bought it and they shot it for a couple months, brought it back in, and I think it was about half the price that it was.
Whoa, nice.
Retail. Yeah, I got
That's
it for
the way
a
to
great
go.
deal. Got it for a great deal. And so I shot it a few times, and I was just amazed. I was flat out amazed
I
at
like
how
it.
smooth the
It's
draw
like a pretty
cycle
sweet
was.
bow. What's the length axle to axle? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it's 30 inches.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
And then I see you have a drop away arrow rest. Is that like a QAD?
No, that's
Okay.
so that drop away rest, that's a Hamsky primer. It's a limb driven rest.
Oh, got it. Cool.
Yeah. I used to use QAD, but I like limb driven a little bit better. Just the idea of like if I have a malfunction, if that cord rips or something, that I can just take. I carry extra D-loop material with me. The fact that I can just run some through, tie it up, cinch it down, and turn one bolt, and it's good to go again. I'm back hunting.
Oh, yeah, that's
I like
a good
that.
point on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for the other ones that, well, I don't even know how mine just connects to one of the strings. Is all I know.
It's called cable driven. Basically,
okay.
they tie it into one of your bus cables that goes to your cams.
Got it. Okay.
And if that breaks, you're gonna have a much harder time
Dialing it.
keeping it timed well, and you're gonna have it's just rough. Whereas with this, I pull that cord tight, cinch it down, tie it, it's done. That's
okay,
it.
nice. And
Yeah.
do you manually flip it up or
Nope.
Yeah,
it's got a full containment cage around it. I just slap my arrow in there, it holds it, and I did like the fact that with the QAD you can kind of cock it. You could like you know cock it up and have your arrow already.
I don't have a QAD. I have a Apex. It was like $80 or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's good rest.
And but it is the manual cock on that.
And those are nice. I shot my first bolt with one of those, and I do really like it. I liked it mainly because it felt like it was less noisy, but I've just, you know, I've got felt on my launch pad. I've got, you know, everything's rubberized around there, so I don't worry about sound anymore.
It doesn't click too loud when it drops.
No, it doesn't make any sound when it drops, actually.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mine
super nice.
has a little click, but it's funny because I listen to the guys like videos where they're shooting like super expensive bows, and I don't know if it's because of the camera or not, but man, their bows are loud.
Yeah, it's probably because of the camera for sure. I think bows are pretty loud. They're louder than I think a lot of people give them credit for.
Sure.
But I mean, there's bows quieter than others, but across the board, they're all pretty. They're pretty loud. And there's ways you can quiet it down. You know, you can lock tight your bolts. You can, you know, tighten everything down nice and snug so you don't have any loose parts. And then another thing is also just having quality components. You know, like the quiver I run is a tight spot quiver. That thing locks down, barely moves at all. You know, spot hog sight, that thing doesn't move. You know, a lot of these lower end bows, a lot of people buy when they first get them. They come with out of the box components, just a whisker biscuit, stuff like that. And it's pretty noisy.
Well, and that's what I have. I have a Bear Species.
Yeah, that's a good bow.
2020. What year is it now? It's 24, so it's a 22.
What year is it?
Yeah. But I mean, I got the whisker biscuit out of there because I hated how it affected my arrow flight.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I don't really have any goals to change bows anytime soon. It's just been a good bow.
Here's the thing. Bows have come a long way in the past 10, 20 years, but people were killing plenty big animals with
it's true.
marten, bear,
Yep.
old Matthews, like all these old bows, these single cam, single limb.
Which Matthews nowadays is more, you know, upper class bows there. Especially like the Phase 4. Are they on the Phase 5 or?
No, Phase 4, then I think the most recent one's the Lift.
Okay.
Yeah, the Matthews lift. And yeah, they're definitely on the upper echelon of things. Probably one of the more popular bow brands out there for sure. At the end of the day, though, you don't need a $3,000 bow. As long the main part is just getting the bow you have tuned in and just taking steps to make the bow a little bit quieter, putting dampeners on the strings, putting dampeners on your limbs, making sure all your stuff's snug, using Loctite, stuff like that.
Yeah. You now live in Tigard, and I was curious about, what's it like living in a populated area? Like, how do you beat the crowds, or what's sort of the challenges of that? Because you said you grew up in a small town. Because I now live in Salem, but I grew up in McMinnville, and there's a big difference for me on where I'm able to go and how long it takes me to get there.
Yeah, so I grew up in a little town called North Plains. It's just north of Hillsboro or Beaverton, Oregon. We always call it the last McDonald's on the way to the coast.
Yeah.
You're taking Highway 26. I grew up there, and yeah, it was nice and quiet, a lot of cornfields, stuff like that. So transitioning from that environment out here to where it's all highways and lots of people, and it was a little bit of a culture shock for me. But you live in the environment and find things to be grateful for. The food out here is pretty good. There's a lot of good food. There's a lot of good people, and you just kind of come to realize that not everyone's gonna live the same lifestyle as you. So you find ways to cope with it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, where I live in this area called the Tigard Triangle. I got Highway 217, 99W, and I-5 all right here next to my house, so I'm able to
escape in any direction.
I can go anywhere, baby. I can get anywhere.
So does that help you get to your spots?
Right. Yeah, that's a big help, because a lot of my spots are, I have to drive an hour or a couple hours to get to some of my spots.
Oh yeah.
But it does make it easy. Just hop, skipping, and jumping away. Traffic sucks. I do not like bumper to bumper traffic.
Yeah.
But it's something you got to deal with. If you're gonna live in a city and want to hunt and fish, you got to put up with traffic.
So, do you find that there's a lot of competition for spots?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. More so fishing than hunting. I do find
fishing's like a fight every time, but
I could tell you insane stories I had on the river, but it's just, especially a lot of the rivers I fish, they're very, very popular, very close to Portland, the Portland metro area. You're going to have a hard time, but you just got to be willing to put in more effort than other people. I have my home river, I have over 300 fishing spots on. And so no matter how populated or crowded it gets, I know for a fact I'll be able to find somewhere and find some peace and quiet, maybe some fish.
Sweet.
And it's kind of the same with hunting, A lot of the hunting spots, when you're closer to the Portland metro area, you're going to be running into Toyota Tacomas and, even a couple cyber trucks every now and then.
Oh, really? Yeah, man.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, that's a picture I'd like to see. Cybertruck with an elk in the back of it.
Yeah, so it definitely forces you to be a little bit more like, you have to be a little bit more on the fly. You got to keep your options open.
Plan A, B, C, D kind of a thing.
You better have them all the way down to Z, buddy.
Oh, wow.
You got to have them all the way down to Z.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not even getting into a spot.
Because in McMinnville, I could get to plan A pretty much any time, sometimes plan B. In Salem, it's been A, B, usually C, I can make it out, but you're saying it's even all the gates are full pretty much?
Yeah, it can be pretty rough, especially like you said earlier on in the conversation, how it's becoming more popular. There's a lot of conversation out there with Joe Rogan, Cameron Haynes, Adam Greentree. I can go on and on and on about all these wonderful podcasters, Remy Warren, all these guys putting all this wonderful information out there. And honestly, it's a great thing. It's building the hunting community. But with that, it's going to bring crowds. And every single year I go and I revisit some of my spots and I find more and more people, and it's becoming more crowded out there. But we're fortunate we live in a state with a lot of public land.
Yeah, and the woods are always evolving too. Like, if you're hunting the sort of mixed timber in public land, it's like, well, they logged this unit, but now the other one's too thick, so you find a different one, and then you hunt it for a little while, then they log it or whatever else changes. It's it's like every few years I have to find a new system, because they're changing it so much.
Yeah, you have to stay fluid, you have to maneuver the landscape kind of like the elk do. The elk are going to be maneuvering in using the landscape in different ways every single year, the terrain features and different plots of land. You know, they'll be in one patch one year, and maybe they'll be in the next patch the next year. Maybe they'll come back the year after that.
Yeah.
You have to, you know, stay on your toes.
Well, let's talk about Vaughn Adventures. So, how long have you been making videos?
So this is gonna be a funny story. So I started making videos back in 2016, actually, quite some time ago now. But it wasn't any of the content you would have recognized me for.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So I've been studying mycology for the better half of 2 decades now, which is actually it's the study of fungus and mushrooms and stuff like that. So I know quite a bit about mushrooms in the state of Oregon, where to find them.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so my original videos on YouTube were on the topics of mushroom identification and taxonomy.
Man.
Yeah, so I would go through
cool.
and I would
I'm going to be sending you some pictures this fall.
I'll add you to the list.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So I would basically come out with these videos trying to help people be able to accurately identify mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest, mainly to, you know, hopefully get some interest in it, because, you know, mycology is actually a really understudied field. You know, we've only been studying mushrooms, if I'm correct. I think we've only been studying mushrooms, like, you know, pretty hardcore since the 1970s. It's a new science. And a lot of people out here, they like the idea of going out and foraging mushrooms for themselves, and the thought that of someone potentially harming themselves makes me sick to my stomach.
Yeah.
And so I started coming out with these identification videos of how to identify tons of different species. I showed people how to identify edible species, toxic species. I showed people how to identify even the psychedelic species, even the ones that you use to make dyes for clothing out of. I showed all of them.
Oh,
but
cool.
Because I didn't have any discretion on which ones I covered, YouTube didn't like that very much.
Oh, yeah.
So I think I had 16 videos out, and I had close to 2 million views through all of those. I had one video that had close to 500,000 views on it, and YouTube one by one started removing my videos and giving me community guideline standard strikes. And the guideline that I had apparently broken was I was teaching people how to manufacture narcotics.
Because of the psychedelic episodes?
Yes.
Yep.
And unfortunately, I had to remove all of them. Otherwise, I was forced to quit my YouTube channel. Yeah. And
it was the same YouTube channel?
Yeah, same YouTube channel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, same channel. Back then, my YouTube channel was called Vet PDX.
Okay.
Kind of a weird name. Didn't really know what I was doing back then. But yeah, and eventually I realized, well, I like sharing my life with people and sharing the things I know and helping people get better at, you know, outdoor activities. And I did pretty good with the mushroom hunting content, and people ask me to this day if I'll ever come out with more videos, and I will. I have a mushroom hunting video on my channel now where we go pick burn morel mushrooms. Oh yeah, absolutely delicious mushroom if you've ever tried them. Oh my god. Oh
yeah, that's like the only. I've seen chanterelles and lobsters. I've never harvested them though, but morels are the only ones I've ever harvested.
Phenomenal.
Yeah,
they taste so good. So I have that video up, and I'll be making more in the future, but I have to be extremely careful. I almost lost my YouTube channel because of it.
Yeah, and now, I mean, you've got a good amount of subscribers. Your elk video was really popular.
yeah, I did pretty good.
I'm sure that was exciting.
You know, it was. You know, it kind of sucks when you're getting the sort of views that I was getting, and then you kind of have to quit making that content and kind of, you know, reorganize yourself and what you're making. It was a big change for me, and it was a big drastic change for my subscribers. I went from getting, on my lowest video, I think I had 64,000 views, down to, you know, I think one of my videos has 200 views on it.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
That's a big kick in the teeth, you know. But fortunately, I didn't lose any subscribers. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of the subscribers that I had, they were interested in the outdoors in general. And so when I transitioned over, okay, I'm going to start showing hikes I go on, camping trips, fishing trips. And then when I started hunting, I'm going to share some of my hunts with you guys. Yeah. It was cool to see how many people stuck around and actually wanted to hang out and watch some of my adventures with me.
And your fishing videos are awesome.
Well, thank you.
I like I watched one recently. What did you catch? You caught like a really dark Chinook on this like tiny little pool.
Yeah,
It was just like super beautiful. And then you fought that fish for what felt like forever.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And it was so dark. I didn't know the dark fish fought that good for that long.
So that's a funny story, is because that's actually the first Chinook I ever caught.
Yeah, I remember hearing you say that in the video. Yeah.
So I've fished for quite some time, but I've always been a steelhead angler. And like, I know you'd think, well, if you steelhead angled for as long as I have, I would have inevitably caught some salmon. And I have, but I never caught a Chinook.
Oh, yeah.
And I was fishing for coho, twitching jigs for coho salmon, and I just ended up hooking that Chinook there. And
That's cool.
took me for a ride, man.
Yeah, dude, it was cool.
Yeah, it was fun. It was cool stuff, and it's cool seeing that people actually enjoyed some of those adventures. So I'm excited to be able to share a lot of this stuff with people.
And it keeps you out there, right? Because you know, I mean, just being out there and enjoying it keeps you out there. But
It's one
a
thing,
little.
but-
It brings it into your home as you're editing the videos and posting them, and then the online community that builds around that. It's just kind of another avenue to talk about the outdoors and be a part of it.
And beyond that, I think one thing that isn't touched on at all is this is it's like a photo album. A lot of people don't really talk about this, but my YouTube channel truly is like a photo album of some of my really cool experiences and things I've gotten to do in my life.
Yeah.
Like, these aren't just things I went out to film a video for. Those are some of the most incredible experiences in my life. And the concept that maybe one day, if I have children and they have children and I have grandchildren, that they could go watch Grandpa Vaughn's YouTube channel and go see his first elk hunt. I don't know. I really think that's a cool idea. Yeah. And even for myself, we all struggle and have dark times in our lives, and to be able to go back and watch one of my incredible experiences where I was just on cloud nine, I think it's a really fortunate thing that we have in this day and age to be able to do that.
For sure. And you film, I see a GoPro sitting there. Do you use a DSLR too, or?
I did use a DSLR for a lot of my videos, but I've since switched. I've noticed when I'm carrying a ton of camera gear, it can kind of take me away from the sport, and what I'm actually trying to do, and I end up focusing more on the camera gear.
Yeah.
And I end up getting these lackluster videos where I don't catch anything, or there's nothing exciting about it. And I don't want to be someone that just puts filler content out there. If someone watches my video, I want them to watch it and actually feel like they just enjoyed something, there's some excitement to it. So I use my smartphone. I use a couple.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I use my smartphone a lot. A lot of my most recent stuff's all filmed on my smartphone.
Wow.
Yeah, I use my smartphone, and then I have 2 DJI Osmo action cameras that I use.
Oh, I'm not familiar with those.
They're incredible. This GoPro's a paperweight.
Yeah.
It's a GoPro 11 Black Mini. It worked for all of about 2 weeks.
Really?
Yeah, and now it looks like a staticky 90s television when I look at the clips back. Yeah, there's actually about 10 steelhead clips on there that I'll never be able to use.
Wow.
And there were some incredible fights, and I'll never be able to upload them.
Man, wow. Never would have guessed that. Huh.
Yeah, me neither. And my DJIs, both of them are about 4 years old, and I bought this thinking it was going to be an upgrade, and I'm just going to keep using my old cameras.
Yeah. Well, let's... One thing we always want our guests to walk away with is some sort of tips for their outdoor pursuits. So let's get into the tips section of this. And you have done a lot of trout fishing since you were a teenager, and even to now. We've both admitted to our guilty pleasure of the power bait stalkers, but we don't need to focus too much on that. But that is a part of the opportunities out here, especially living in populated areas, the Willamette Valley, and being able to be fairly close to some great trout fishing holes. So I wanted to hear some tips. For example, what do you fish different, a lake versus a pond?
Well, I actually don't really fish them too differently at all. Maybe how I fish will be differently. So the number one setup that I would tell anyone to start using for trout fishing is going to be a Carolina rig. You're fishing off the bottom with power bait, right? You can use that same setup for a lake or a pond, but the nuances might be something like, maybe you shorten your leader because the pond isn't as deep as the lake, and you want in the lake, you want your bait floating a lot higher off the bottom into that water column.
Yeah.
The water column's a lot shallower in a pond, so you don't need as long of a leader. Just little things like that to think of. But also,
That's a good point.
You can also change up the size of your tackle. If you're fishing a really big lake, you can get away with using some really big flashy lures. You know, fish can be really far away and you're trying to attract them to you.
Yeah.
Whereas a pond, especially if it's a stocked pond and a lot of people are hitting it pretty often, you know, throwing a really, really tiny like rooster tail or something like that, as opposed to like your larger variants, might actually get you more action because everyone else is throwing regular sized lures where it is, if you size your lure down, you might actually be able to entice that fish.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And especially in smaller bodies of water, you know, you got to think a smaller body of water like a pond, a lot more people coming in and out fishing it. They're seeing a lot more stuff. Those fish have seen almost every lure and bait imaginable, you know? So if you size your stuff down, it's a lot less intimidating to the fish.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good tip there.
Yeah.
Man.
So like, whereas if I were to give you a great example, on a lake, I might use like, say, a 1/3 ounce or a 1/4 ounce lure, whereas in a pond, I might use like an 1/8 or 1/16. Yeah. And sizing it down will really get you a lot more action.
Okay. Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of people, when they first start bait fishing for trout, they buy like pretty good size treble hooks, and then I always use like the smallest treble hook I can get. You know,
tiny,
just the tiniest thing. And I've never really given it much thought to what you're saying, but I wonder if that's a part of it.
No, it is. It definitely is. Well, you think about these too, especially trout. A lot of these trout are stocked. What do they eat? They're eating pellets, you know?
Yeah.
They're not eating these giant gobstopper-sized pellets that everyone's trying to throw out there. They will eat them, but, you know, if you're really trying to go for numbers, if you're trying to get that limit, size your tackle down. Put on, like you said, a really small treble hook. Put on a little bit of power bait that's no more than, like, the size of the tip of your pinky or something, you know? Like a small pellet size.
Yeah.
Just enough to cover that treble hook. Watch how many bites you're going to get.
What about lures? What's your favorite lures for like trout?
Gosh,
in a pond or a lake? Let's focus more on a lake-sized body of water now.
Yeah. So there's almost no wrong answer when it comes to lures. It's just more or less, are there fish there to bite them, and what colors are you using? So I've used everything under the sun: Panther Martins, Rooster Tails, Thomas Boyant spoons. I've used P-line spoons. I've dragged blue foxes.
Yeah.
I've dragged wedding rings, everything. I've narrowed it down to a few lures based off of a couple facts, and mainly just, you know, how many fish I've caught off them. One of my favorite lures to drag around a lake is a Rapala. And specifically a very small rainbow trout pattern Rapala.
Okay.
Rainbow trout are cannibals. They will eat each other. They will eat each other's babies. They're fried. And so just keeping that in mind, you drag around a really small, fixed body, sinking Rapala.
Okay.
That lure alone has gotten me more trout than any other lure.
Really?
In the stores, yeah.
Do you have to add any weight to it or a flasher?
Not one bit. They actually make sinking Rapalas that dive down, and so I don't put any weight. I don't add any bait. I don't put a flasher in front of it.
You don't do any worm tips or nothing.
I just flat line it about 60 feet behind whatever I'm trolling, and usually I use an inflatable raft. But I mean, you could even go into some of the stream inlets on some of these lakes and fish these Rapalas there too.
Yeah.
And you'll get tons of action. Rapalas are good. Brass or gold spoons work very, very well in all bodies of water. Creeks, rivers, ponds, lakes, doesn't matter. If you throw a brass spoon out there, a trout will eat it. Rooster tails are good. But next to the Rapala, the number one lure that's caught more trout than anything is probably that black and gold Panther Martin.
Really?
Black and gold Panther Martin, man. That thing is a classic.
And that's casting or pulling?
Both. I mean, I've caught him from the bank. One time I was at one of my favorite lakes that I could go fishing at. This kid was throwing one from the parking lot, and I watched this kid limit out on 16-inch rainbow trout in less than 10 minutes. I was sitting there rolling up my raft, putting it up in my car, and I just watched this kid rip them out of the lake one after another, just using one lure, just that black and gold Panther Martin.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah.
That's cool. Is there any kind of specific poles or reels or line that you recommend?
You I've tried a lot of the different brands. Really, it's just going to come down to get what you can afford. Fishing gear can get really expensive nowadays, and
for real.
they make a lot of really good fishing gear for really cheap. You don't need to go spend $300 on a custom rod. If your goal is just to get out there and go catch fish, you can spend $60 on an ugly stick and be out there. But if you're looking for something that's kind of like middle of the road, something that's going to have some quality to it, feel kind of nice, but it's not going to break the bank, Okuma makes a lot of really good products. I would recommend their SST line for their rods.
Okay.
Those are going to run you from $60 to $100 for a rod. And I really, really like their Okuma Cymar reels. It's a CEYMAR. They have a new one that just came out called the Cymar HD. I run them on my steelhead rods over there, and for the money, that you can't get a better reel. I think they're $70 and they're incredible. They have the old model of them. They have the old model of the Cymar. I think they regularly go on sale at Bimart for like $30.
Oh, wow.
So between
And you've got 4 of them.
Yeah, I like them a lot. Between like if you're just trying to get like a regular trout pull, between a SST and a Okuma Cymar, you're gonna be in $100, $120, and that'll get you fishing. You'll have that rod combo a long time, and you'll thoroughly enjoy it.
Awesome, cool. I think a tip that I would give there is use the lightest line possible. For me, bait fishing, like from the bottom for trout in lakes and ponds, I'm only using 4-pound test.
Really?
Yeah, and I found it makes a big difference because when I was a teenager, my logic always was, well, I can afford 20-pound test, so why don't I buy 20-pound test? And then I learned that, there comes a point where a trout can feel that, or it just doesn't feel as nice, when you can't cast as far, and there's all these different things that, I run 4-pound test on my little light trout rod, and, I run 6-pound test and a 4-pound leader. I run 6-pound test.
Sense.
Yeah, and man, I can lob that thing out there like 100 yards and be good to go.
Oh man, I hate to admit it, but I don't think I ever grew up then. I still I use on my trout rods you see there, they have 30-pound test braid, and the leader.
Oh really?
The leader is 10-pound test.
Man.
Yeah.
And you're slaying fish, so I can't say anything against that.
It's just the brand of line. So I try to buy the most expensive fluorocarbon I can. Okay. That's what the ticket to it. It's gonna make a big difference if you're running, 10-pound test Maxima Ultra Green. The fish are gonna see that. But what I like to use a lot. I use the P-Line Tactical Fluorocarbon.
Okay.
They make it in Japan. It's a really high quality fluorocarbon. You can take the 15-pound test and hold it underwater, and you can't see it.
Wow.
Yeah. So
That's amazing because for maybe it was a visibility thing then. I mean, part of it too is buying monofilament higher pound test line. It has so much memory.
Yeah.
And that was another thing I was always battling. But then when I switched to 6-pound test, it just, everything about it was so much easier to manage.
Well, and something to consider too is the price point. We're talking with the tactical P line, I'm talking you're spending like $20, $30 a spool.
Yeah.
And most people don't have the money. Most people don't have the money to go drop that. Yeah, to go drop that. When you're buying like weights, hooks, bait, and you got to get line and all this stuff, it starts adding up quick.
Yeah.
And, that Maxima Ultra Green for $5 starts looking pretty good.
Yeah.
So that's where getting the lighter line would definitely come into effect. So,
sure.
If you're trying to get a budget setup and you're trying to catch fish confidently and know that you're going to get bit, but you're not trying to spend a ton of money, definitely you can get that lighter line in some regular monofilament, and it'll cost you much, much less, and you'll do just as well.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. Great tips. Awesome. Well, everyone go out there, catch some trout. It'll be good. One of the markers of our show is we like to dig into our spiritual connection to the life and the outdoors and sort of how we interact our identity as humans and our lives in the outdoor space And so I wanted to ask you, Vaughn, what's your spiritual connection to life in the outdoors?
You know, it took me a little while to kind of realize my connection with the outdoors. You know, it wasn't so evident growing up that I liked adventure as much as I do now, and it kind of grew on me. And it was spending time in the woods and around animals and in nature that, you know, I really feel like I actually found myself as a person. My whole life, I never really knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, what I wanted to do. I spent time outside and I realized there's this whole world of adventure and all these different sports and activities and ways to find myself, disciplines, and I realized that it's the only thing that's truly human, if you think about it, because human beings have been on this earth for, I think, the better part of 300,000 years now, and we have done nothing but live off of this land, harvest resources, and do our best to survive. And once I realized I had an avenue to put myself back into that mindset in some way, shape, or form, to kind of find my connection in this world and how I evolved to be a part of it, it was just really special. And getting out there and learning what I can do as a human, what it means to, you know, be part of the land and to put yourself back into that food chain. I don't know. I feel like I learned more about myself in the last 4 years than I did in the last 25.
Yeah.
And it's really special. And it makes you extremely grateful for the gift of life and to be on this planet and to be able to do the things that we're allowed to do.
Yeah.
This place is just so beautiful, and I feel like people take it for granted every single day. The wildlife, even the smallest plants and animals, and, you know, the things that are so trivial to most people, like the pine cones on the ground, stuff like that. Like there's just so much beauty in life out there to be grateful for, and that we are fortunate for. And I feel like every day I get to spend out there, it just brings me that much closer to that, you know.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that might be, you know, a lot of people might call it God. A lot of people might relate it to, you know, the meaning of their life. But I just feel like every day I get to spend out there brings me closer to whatever that is. And I hope that maybe one day I'll be able to, you know, realize some meaning to life in some of these adventures and endeavors.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think a big part of why we all share that experience as outdoorsmen is it's our natural habitat.
That's it.
As much as we have created all these comforts and technology and cars and houses and everything, cities that humans live in now.
Yeah.
Our natural habitat is the wild, the outdoors. And that's where we're most in tune with how we were created to be.
We were born of the earth. We will fall back into the earth.
Yeah.
And we are of the earth, man. I mean, as much of a hippie I sound like saying that, I mean, you can't argue it.
I don't think you sound too much like a hippie. I think you sound like an outdoorsman.
Well, I think the two go hand in hand in some aspects.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's important, and I feel like it's something a lot of people lack these days. You know, a lot of people they coop themselves up in their homes and in the concrete jungle, and, you know, I feel like a lot of people would do well to spend some time outside and, you know, gain some life experience from out there. There's a lot of good to be had.
Absolutely, man. Very well put. Thank you for sharing all that. And thanks for this conversation, man. It's been fun talking about stuff that we love to talk about. Thanks for inviting me into your home and recording this thing. I'd love for you to go ahead and tell us where to follow you, what sort of stuff you want us to look out for, or anything like that.
Yeah, thanks again, man, and it was awesome having you over. I'd love to do this again sometime.
Yeah, we gotta talk mushrooms.
Oh yeah, oh man, that's gonna be a long one.
All right.
Hopefully you don't have dinner plans for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my name is Vaughn Hanchett. My first name is Vaughn, kind of like the actor Vince Vaughn, or if you like guitar playing, Stevie Ray Vaughan. I run a small, humble YouTube channel called Vaughn Adventures. I also have an Instagram called Vaughn Adventures. We do fishing, hunting, camping, whitewater rafting, hopefully some rock hounding, fossil hunting, gold panning. I'm gonna try to do it all.
All
I'm gonna
right.
do everything. So
Awesome.
come adventure with me.
I love it. Great. So follow him on YouTube. Check out. I just got to plug his latest elk hunting video is really awesome, and I'm sure you're gonna try to get some cool stuff this year too.
I'm gonna do my best.
Yep. All right. I love it. Well, this is Bryant interviewing Vaughn. We're signing out. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, guys. Woke up this morning, had kind of an odd breakfast. I drank some coffee, made some spring Chinook salmon. That was my breakfast this morning.